स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणेश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यसितं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रं यहमहमिति साक्षादात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामुच्चतव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्। Namo Ramana. We will commence the Friday Atma Vicharam by listening to Bhagavan's Upadesham and meditating upon it. We have been reading Bhagavan's Upadesham from the book Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950, a compilation of all the question answers on Atma Vichara, questions put to Bhagavan and answered by Bhagavan. The compilation has been done by our founder president Shri R. Natarajanji. After meditating on this week's question answer, we will have a 20 minutes Atma Vichara session. After that, our President Shataka would be talking about Atma Vicharam as it has been contemplated in Ramana Gita, which is Bhagavan's answers to devotee on self-enquiry, compiled in Sanskrit by Ganapati Muni. Finally, we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. The 76th question, the devotee asks Bhagavan, what is most suitable for gaining facilities for steady meditation? Question is, what is most suitable for gaining facilities for steady meditation? Maharshi, it depends on one's tendencies. One may find yoga suitable, and another man God's name, and so on. However, the essential need is the self-enquiry. I repeat Bhagavan's answer. It depends on one's tendencies. One may find yoga suitable, and another man God's name, and so on. However, the essential need is the self-enquiry. It is often, as sadhakas, we find no matter how many days and times we have meditated, that the mind would take a long time or still continue to run around. So we often wonder, is there any possibility of the thoughts slowing down in this mind? And therefore, no matter what path of sadhana we might have adopted, as Bhagavan says, based on our tendencies, this would be somewhat a common question to all of us. Will this mind ever slow down? This rush of thoughts that seems to be happening, will it ever slow down at all? And if at all, if it is going to slow down, or there is a possibility, what approach would be appropriate for us to adopt so that this mind becomes a little steady? And Bhagavan here is saying, though we may take up whatever sadhana as per our tendencies, because we may find nama japa to be more easy and more comfortable to do, or we may take a physical yoga sadhana wherein we control the mind through the control of the physical body, or we control the mind through the pranayama, or we may take up whichever route which is convenient to us. Bhagavan says, for all of them, the essential part, very important for us to note down, the emphasis Bhagavan is saying here, that the essential one would be self-enquiry. So we need to ask this question, why is this Bhagavan saying that Atma Vichara is self-enquiry, or Atma Vichara is essential? Now, it is fundamentally we have to understand in Advaita Vedanta, or what is real is only the self. Therefore, what is important for us to recognize is to get a clear understanding, or not more than that, a constant abidance as the self that we verily are. Because that alone can root out all other delusions and make us get a clear picture of what we essentially are. Therefore, no matter what other practices we may, or sadhanas we may do, holding on to the body, the mind, and the various japas or any other ways, however, the essential enquiry, who is the doer, to whom is this, alone can turn our attention on the actions and the doer back to the source which enables the doer, which enables the action. And therefore, Bhagavan emphasizes us here that that is the most essential need, because we have to turn inward. That is the important thing. One, this as sadhakas, turning inward becomes very, very essential. And the second thing, when we are looking at what is the means of gaining a steady meditation. A steady meditation, Bhagavan often says self is the meditation. The real meditation is the self itself. So, if it is naturally present, if the self is the only truth, and it is naturally available to all of us, and the recognition or being that self is the natural way to achieve steady meditation. Any other way of physically controlling the breath, or focusing our attention on one object may be a good aid, but it is still not natural. So Bhagavan always brings us to that which is naturally present or happening, which is effortless. And the self alone is the true meditator, or the true meditation, wherein The meditation is continuously there. The self is untouched by anything that is happening in the realm of the mind, in the realm of the intellect, in the realm of the body, in the realm of the world. Here and now, like the dreamer, whatever may be in the dream, whatever amount of incidents that may happen, including, let us say, I won $100 million lottery in a dream, or I might have appeared to have killed somebody in the dream. As soon as we wake up from the dream, as we realize that all of them was not real, I don't turn out to be a killer, nor I turn out to be a richest man because of the lottery. I remain as I am. Likewise, when we turn our attention to the self, we recognize that the self alone is untouched by all the activities of the body, activities of the mind, activities of the intellect, activities of the ego here and now. So, therefore, waking up to our real state is the way to see that we are in that steady meditation. That is, we are the whole purpose of the meditation, which is here to slow down, as we say, of the mind running around helter and shelter, becomes found is found to be natural because there is no mind in the self, no ego in the self, no body in the self, no intellect in the self which we need to tackle. It is here and now, the pure presence, the pure consciousness that it is, and at the same time, even if all of the activities of the body, the mind, the intellect continues to be, because of this all belongs to nature, and that's how the Prakriti works, constantly changing, moment to moment. The self is untouched. Last week, we looked at how the sun, in his presence, the whole activity happens. Likewise, the self, which is pure existence, pure consciousness, because of its presence and because of its awareness, we say that the world is, the body is, the mind is, the intellect is, and it is functioning this way, that way. So we are the Atma to all of them. These are all Anatma. These are all selfless. They don't have their own existence. They don't have their own awareness. We lend the awareness, or we lend the reality, we lend the existence by our attention to them. And then we give the reality to what we are attending, the objects, and then we claim, oh, my mind is running helter and shelter, my intellect is not able to understand, or my ego is very strong, or my body is behaving this way. Like how we superimpose the snake on the rope. Therefore, fundamentally, if we don't inquire this mistake that we do, wherein we superimpose what is not really Atma Vastu, which is Anatma Vastu, to whom by our attention we fill it with energy. That is why it is called the Atma, it is the source which makes it all possible. It is by and through our attention to the Anatma Vastu, we claim that it has to be. Sharda often in the self-enquiry workshops gives this analogy of the lighthouse. And we often think that the mind is running with thoughts, but it is actually, when we understand that this whole Prakriti is Anatma or Jada, all of these, the body, the mind, the intellect, the world, and all of them are Jada, and it is only our attention to them that is making it look and work as though it is alive and kicking and changing and moving. Like in the light of the sun, everything appears, the water evaporates, then the rain falls, the wind blows, all of that seems to happen. Likewise, it is in the mind as well. All of our objects in the fundamental way are only in the form of a vasana, a jada vasana inside it. It is the attention that is moving from one to another, like the lighthouse light falling on many, many objects. It appears that the objects appear quickly, like when we run the book with pictures of different things, it looks as though the picture is moving. Essentially, likewise, when all the objects are in the vasana and the light of the consciousness fall on it, and in such tremendous speed, and what for, if you can fundamentally question, looking for happiness in all of them. And when it happens so, we see that, or we claim that it is the mind which is moving so fast. Actually, fundamentally, it is the awareness which is shedding its light, looking for the happiness in the objects with such tremendous thing and rejecting, oh, this is not good, that is not good, this is not right, that is not right. However, the recognition, only through inquiry, we figure out that the happiness is the total absence of the division, or the absence of lending the reality to any object, but recognizing that oneself is the true reality, and that one is already, and therefore one is untouched by all of these external activities. That recognition, as Bhagavan says, when the cow recognizes that it is going to get the peaceful feed of the grass in its own shed and need not have to go out looking for it in the out of the shed into the objective world or the different forms. Likewise, when the recognition comes, then the stillness or the self that we are will be recognized. Therefore, inquiry is essential to show the fundamental error. The fundamental error where we live our real nature, or we take something else to be real as opposed to recognizing ourselves to be real. That is the fundamental error that keeps happening. And that happens because we are looking for the happiness in the objective world. But by inquiring, by recognizing that in whatever which way we move to any of this object, whether we move to physical gross object, whether we move to the subtle intellectual object, or thought form, or this notion of ego, or an individual, none of this brings about that steadiness, nor does it give the happiness. When that clarity comes about, then the self let goes all of this and remains as it is, and it then springs the fullness of happiness. In that, the Vedanta, the Upanishads, the Vedas also says, Uha, Uha, Uha. That silence, or when Annamacharya says, Brahma Mokkate, Para Brahma Mokkate, Tandanana, Tani Tandanana, the happiness that flows when everything is let go on, having realized that it is the superimposition or the wrong holding that was fundamentally causing the happiness which was natural in me to disappear. When that recognition comes about, only through the self-enquiry, and therefore Bhagavan says here, the essential need, no matter what is the other sadhana we may be doing to make the mind steady, the self-enquiry is important to turn our attention back to the truth that we verily are here and now. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, with which we have come to this most direct path for the next 20 minutes, no matter how many thoughts rise and no matter whatever is the nature of those thoughts, whether it is good, bad, spiritual, we have to see they are all objects, and therefore we, by attending to them, by they are not real. We lend the reality by attending to them, and therefore we should diligently inquire to whom is this, who am I, and with that questioning, with that inquiry, turn our attention back to the existence consciousness which we verily are, and abide or remain in that. And the remaining itself as what we are is the true vision of the self. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, the next 20 minutes, let us do Atma Vichara.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as the self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self, manifest as Ramana, in this satsang, we meditate on Bhagavan's answers in general to questions related to self-enquiry, having been compiled by Sri R. Natarajan. And in this part of the satsang, we meditate on Bhagavan's answers to seekers on various subjects, on self-enquiry as well as other subjects on which he's been questioned. In later compilations, we have similar compilation in Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi in English and Guruvachaka Kovai by Muruganar Swami in Tamil. And this, which we are now meditating on, is Sri Ramana Gita, which is a Sanskrit compilation by Ganapati Muni of answers by Bhagavan to questions from various seekers. And this compilation is divided into 18 chapters, and we are now meditating on the 7th chapter, which is directly on the subject of self-enquiry. And in this chapter, first, Karshni, the questioner, had asked Bhagavan about the form of self-enquiry, what exactly does self-enquiry mean, and what are the benefits from self-enquiry. And further, he had gone on to ask what is the fitness for self-enquiry, what are the qualifications required for self-enquiry. And then in the section which we finished completing meditation on that section, Kashni had asked, what are is it okay for those who are ready and ripe to do self-enquiry to engage themselves in other purificatory activities and prescribed activities? And Bhagavan had pointed out that that is fine because it leads to non-indulgence in unnecessary or negative activities of the body, mind and speech. And further, he had gone on to say how these activities should be performed by describing how these activities are performed by the ripe souls. That's what he calls them pakwa. The pakwa or the pakwi does these actions for the sake of the welfare of the world and not out of any fear of either scripture or of the world, fear of the world, that what will people say. Without any sense of fear, in whatever the activities are undertaken, the Pakwi undertakes these activities for the welfare of the world. Lokopakaraya. Idam lokopakaraya. Or for sharing this knowledge with others. Paresha upadeshaya. So that's what we find at Bhagavan's life. Bhagavan has allowed himself to partake of activities purely in order to share this wisdom. He has given answers to sincere seekers of truth. Even in days when he was in silence, he has done that. He has spoken. So it may be rarely, but it was there. Of course, to Gambiram Sheshayar and Shiva Prakasham Pillai, he had given only written instructions, but he gave them the instructions. Perhaps that was his Leela, his grace, that they should imbibe those written instructions, write it down after Mananam, and then pass it on to us in the form of the two books, Who Am I and Self-Enquiry. So, Bhagavan says this is how activity may be undertaken. From our perspective of sadhana, we saw that it is good for us to engage in activities which are for the highest good, at least for the good of larger number of people. In a later chapter in Ramana Gita, Bhagavan actually indicates that one should expand one's circle. It may be that one works initially for one's family, then for one's own community, or it may be now community would be one's work arena, where we work for the welfare of that entire organization Or he says, then one could work for the welfare of the state, the country, the whole earth. Nanda Kumarji sometimes points out how this expansion happens. That people may work for a single cause and then they may start working for concepts like preventing global warming or something like that, something which is far larger, which we find like Gandhiji had worked for the independence of our country. So many joined him at that time. So everyone was part of that Lokopakara movement. So they engaged in that and they had single pointed dedication to it. They could even give up their lives for that purpose. So to that extent, one grows above one's own self-centeredness, because the ego is all about self-centeredness. It is for me, it is for me. So to the extent that we are able to expand this consciousness, we are able to make the ego, actually it becomes subtler and subtler, and the more subtle it becomes, it is less dissipated. It is not worried about hundreds of objects, as Dileep was saying today, how fast the mind runs. And very beautifully he told us that it is running only because it is not finding the happiness in each object that it is touching upon. Every thought, if any thought was to give us happiness, we would stay with that thought. I also often wonder about this when I think that the mind is running. Especially also say if I'm engaged in one activity and the mind moves to something else, then I ask myself, why is the mind moving away from this activity to some other thought? I have taken up this activity willingly in order to engage in this. That means I have felt there is some value, some worth in this. So this activity may be any of our actions which we perform in the world, and the same thing holds for our session of self-enquiry also. When we sit down for self-enquiry, why does the mind move away from self-enquiry? Although we sit down for self-enquiry with eagerness, with a loving need to practice self-enquiry, still the mind moves away because it has not yet experienced the joy of the fruit of self-enquiry. Similar is the case of the rest of the thoughts also, the rest of our activities also. So I keep wondering, I say, okay, why have you not found happiness here? But Dileep also today reiterated this concept. He says, because we do not find happiness anywhere, the mind moves. And because happiness cannot be found in an object, the mind has to move from one object to another, because it can never find satisfaction with any objects. But when one starts expanding the consciousness, if that is the method given to us, or because of life circumstances which Bhagavan blesses us with, if it is possible for us to expand our consciousness, then what will happen is that gradually the self-centeredness will disappear and a greater and greater joy will be experienced in those activities. That joy being always a relationship with the self, it means that we will have a greater taste of the self, and this will support our practice of self-enquiry as well. This is what is called the Chitta Shuddhi. So Bhagavan also says that without Bheda Buddhi, without a sense of difference, and with Asanga, with non-attachment, actions are to be performed. This he has told us in Upadesha Saram also much later. That is, Ishwararpitam na ichchaya kritam and Bheda Bhavanat Sohamitti Asau Bhavana Abhida Pavani Mata. So this is what Bhagavan says. Bhagavan says these pure ones, the pakvis, are automatically doing that. But it's also an indicator for us on the path of sadhana. Then he of course gives us a very, very beautiful affirmation. Swavimarsho mahat punyam pavananam hi pavanam. So the most purifying is to get back to our own true nature. Even if we abide for 1 minute, 1 second, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 seconds, less or more. Bhagavan says, even if we still a single thought, it goes a long way because it gives us Atmanubhava. It is Swavimarsha. Whenever a thought is stilled through self-enquiry, it is Swavimarsha. We are actually diving into the self. Vimarsha is to dive into, plunge into the self. Swavimarsha, diving into the self. Swavimarshe mahat punyam pavananam hi pavanam. And then he says that there can be two types of pakvis or jnanis, and there can be two types of approaches also to sadhana, because whatever Bhagavan is telling about the pakvi, we are also seeing that it has a bearing on our sadhana. So he says, Drishyate dvividha nishtha pakvanam adhikarinam tyaga ekanta yogaya parartham cha kriyadharaha. One may be who has done tyaga, one who has done tyaga, renunciate, and who goes for ekanta yoga, who goes into solitude. Such an approach to sadhana is a valid approach, says Bhagavan. But he also says, parartham cha kriyadharaha. So he says, pakvanam adhikarinam. So those who are pakva adhikari, not only the ones who are beginners. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna says the opposite, and he says it is when we are not yet having ripeness, when we don't yet have the sweetness of the Atmanubhava, it may be necessary for us to set aside some specific time for Atma Vichara. It may be necessary for us to choose solitude and sadhana on a more regular basis so that the mind starts enjoying the company of the self. Whereas he says, he gives the example of a sapling. He says when a plant is a sapling, when a tree is a sapling, one needs to put a fence around it so that the cows or the goats or other creatures don't come and eat it up. But once it has grown into a tree, it does not need a fence around it. It is capable of standing without a fence. It does not need any ekanta. It can, in fact, it gives shade to all the comers under it. It gives home to the so many living creatures. It becomes a home. And it gives fruit, of course, to all the living creatures as well. So it is able to become a natural source of sharing. So Bhagavan says, however, it is still possible that those who are the pure ones also may choose to live in solitude. Tyaga ekanta yogaya, or they may take up activity, kriyadharaha, take up activity. Why? Parartham, for the sake of others. Now Bhagavan also explains that when a Jivan Mukta engages in activities, he is saying here for the sake of others, but this for the sake of others is not a conscious motive. It just happens, spontaneously it happens. Muruganar Swami says that Bhagavan sheds grace on every comer by nature and not by choice. Like a tree gives shade, he says. And Ganapati Muni also says, Na karuna guna ramana, na karuna guna ramana, tava vidam pate ramana, hridaya tejasa ramana, sahaja bhaivate. It is natural. Karuna is natural. So this parartham chakriyadharaha should not be misconstrued that there is a conscious motive to help somebody or anybody in particular. When we have this confusion, thinking that Bhagavan wants to show compassion, then we have confusions. Why did he do this for mother? Why did he not do this for somebody else? Why did he do that? It doesn't occur at all, since it is a natural flow of compassion. It just happens as it should. So even in our lives, Bhagavan says that when we have this surrender to the Supreme, or when we have the surrender to the Self, what happens will be automatic divine activity. Bhagavan calls it automatic divine activity. He also says, நீ இருக்க வேண்டிய இடத்துல இருந்தா உன் மூலமா நடக்க வேண்டியது தானே நடக்கும். If you remain in that state where you need to remain, that which needs to get done through you will automatically get done through you. Whether you are moving or not moving, that is the beautiful thing which he is giving us over here. A person may even be sitting silent, yet whatever needs to get done through them will get done through them. That is the divine scheme. So when we understand this divine scheme, then there need not be any anxiety, any rush of thoughts, because as again the example of the sun was also given. Last week it was given that the example of the sun, who is a light unto himself. By being the light, he is able to do everything for everyone. So Bhagavan says, let us choose that which is pavananam hi pavanam. If we choose that which is most purificatory, which is the abidance in the self, and which in the beginning of the chapter Bhagavan has said, it is sarva klesha nivritti. It is the destroyer of all sorrows, all difficulties. If we abide in that, taking Bhagavan's words, that it is first of all the solution, the one solution to all our problems, and not only that, it is very, very purificatory, which means it is auspicious for us and for the entire world. With this certainty, when we get back to the self, what has to get done through our body will automatically get done. Whether it has to sit in solitude or whether it has to move in the world in action and sharing, that will get automatically taken care of, says Bhagavan. And he has lived before our eyes to establish this truth. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.
Namo Ramana. Apara Satchit Sukhavarirashi Yasyormimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chintavihinam Hृदि Chintayami Chintavihinam Hृदि Chintayami. Namo Ramana.